Hey everybody, I'm Ryo Yamaguchi, the publicist at Copper Canyon Press, and you are watching season 3 of our interview series, Line Break, which goes off the page and into the homes and minds of our beloved poets. We began Line Break as a way to connect during the pandemic, and we've had such fun seeing poets on screen, hearing poems, talking about writing, books, life, that we simply had to keep this series going. Thank you for tuning in. I have this interesting kind of tangential memory of my first meeting with Randall Mann this fall in Seattle. I'd been driving this rented minivan around for some press business, and this one night I found myself taking Randall to the hotel we were both staying at. It was our chance for some one-on-one conversation, but I had to follow these really complicated Google Map directions while we spoke. I don't know if you remember this at all, Randall. The sharply winding narrow streets of Seattle were this like tangle of blue lines on the map screen. And Randall and I spoke about work and poetry, poetic history, formalism, all of these really heady topics. Randall's intelligence, the quick pace of our conversation, and the sense of a complex trajectory through a career, technology, and life in this weird dance blended in this like synesthetic meld with the turn-by-turn directions. It was an oddly transcendent experience, but mostly because of the incredible presence I was in, this extraordinary poet and thinker. I've had the great fortune to talk with Randall in more relaxed circumstances since then, and I'm so eager to get to do so again today. Randall, hello. Thank you so much for being here.
Hey, Rio, it's so nice to be here. And yeah, that drive was wild. I mean, I think like I felt like I should apologize because I was like, well, it's getting like heavy and deep, and you were like, yeah, like I need to like find my way to the hotel. But then, you know, it was all good. Yeah, that was fun and weird.
It was super fun. I couldn't have honestly have asked for a better way to like just kind of talk and get to know each other, because we were doing that like getting to know each other, like your life and all that, you know.
Right.
And it was fun. And I'll say, I mean, as someone who I lived in Seattle for a long time, and I find driving around there, I mean, like a lot of, you know, urban areas and on the West Coast, just a little maddening because it's not a grid. It's really confusing, and you know.
Right.
But we got there fine. It was fine.
I mean, we did.
No car accidents. Yeah. That's super funny. Well, I'm grateful to have that memory. I'll have it forever in that night. I think, you know, speaking of memories, so it's the holidays are upon us. You know, Christmas is later this week. Hanukkah just started yesterday. Often when I think about the holidays, particularly when I'm, you know, in a more social setting, actually, I think a lot about New Year's Eve. And I've had some like spectacular New Year's Eves, and I've had just absolute catastrophes on New Year's Eve. So I wanted to start a conversation asking you about a favorite New Year's Eve or a loathed New Year's Eve in your past.
I think a favorite New Year's Eve. I was at my friend Sabina's house, really close friend in Bernal Heights here in San Francisco, and it was just kind of a thrown together house party that kind of got bigger and bigger, but still in a manageable way. And all these people I really liked were there. And then, like children, we pushed the couches and the chairs aside and had like a full-on dance party. And it just kind of kept going. And it was like super fun. And it was like really sweet because I love those people. And, you know, before you knew it, it was like 4 a.m. So yeah, I think that was a really good one. But I mean, I've had some whimpers too. I've had some sort of like existential, am I just like sitting here? Like, is it 10 o'clock? Am I like, you know, drinking sparkling water and wondering, you know, if I actually have any friends or anything. So, you know, I mean, it's like hit or miss. I mean, so, and that's funny because I was just like talking with a friend and I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing for the holidays. I mean, I'm like, you know, I feel like San Francisco is really like, it feels good here right now. Like it feels festive and like the vibes are great. And it's like the first time like you could really feel like these kind of vibes since the pandemic, which was great. So I definitely have like, I'm feeling those, but I'm also kind of like the holidays are bullshit, but like in like the most open-hearted way, you know?
Oh, open-hearted bullshit. That's great. Well, no, I mean, this is a question because, like, I mean, the holidays, they're contentious, they're divisive, you know? Like, I mean, people love them, people hate them, whatever. And New Year's is like that too, because I mean, I think some people like the idea of New Year's Eve, 10 o'clock on the couch passing out. That's clutch. That's the perfect New Year's Eve, you know? But yeah.
I don't know.
But does it feel like Mhm. Yeah.
I feel like I need to like just be. I at least need to be like standing at the top of Dolores Park or something and being like,
Yeah.
"There's, look, city, I'm here. We're here. Let's do this."
Yeah.
So we shall see.
Absolutely, for sure. I love the house party dance party. That's great. I mean, we used to do that all the time in our old place in Chicago. With same thing, we push the couch aside. I love it. We would do it like kind of a lot. Like, I mean, but we threw a lot of parties. We threw a lot of parties. Yeah, it's fun. It's super fun. I'm really into this thing that we do. We call it like Spotify. I use Tidal, but anyway, streaming roulette. So you're playing the party, but then you've just got like, the only rule is you got to add to queue, so everyone can throw on their songs, and it's recommended, but got to get it in the queue, right? It's a jukebox thing.
Right.
Whatever. Yeah.
Totally.
So, but you don't know what you're doing this year yet. Like,
I don't. Oh yeah. You know what? I was just thinking of another really fantastic New Year's. I was in Paris in 2016, and it was amazing. It was a cocaine and oyster party, and so like, but I was like, I don't. Yeah, we're past the cocaine years, but like I had some oysters, and they're like, "Do you want cocaine or an espresso?" And I was with my friend Sabina again, and we're like, maybe espresso. And like, that's cool. And then I remember they played George Michael's Freedom 90, like right around the turn. And we were just like losing our fucking minds. And then other people were really losing their fucking minds. So that was top tier. That was top tier.
There's three. That's lavish, right? I mean, you got Paris, you got oysters, you got cocaine. I mean, that's like, and that something about that too is like just unapologetically be like, I'm just gonna go balls to the wall, right? I mean, just all the way out, like,
balls out. So so that was like, it was genius. And then they like started playing Prince, and then like, I don't know, we were just like, it was just one of those things. And yes, and we like actually had a flight at like 6 a.m. So like Sabina and I are like, we're like going to bed for an hour, and we're like, we're in our 40s. We're like, we don't fucking care. Let's do this. So anyway,
this is great. No, it's okay to be in your 40s. Yeah, I've had a lot of this past weekend, and freaking every weekend I have these like, you know what it is? It's the increased frequency of the aging conversations of like, oh, my eyes, and like da 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 da. And I'm like, I'm getting to a point where it's like, I don't even want to talk about it anymore. Like, it's all in your head. Like, whatever, you are as old as you feel. And if you need to go to Paris to an oyster and cocaine party to remind yourself that you're still alive, then then that's what you do.
Yeah. I treat aging like I treat like my Grindr profile. I just don't put any age on there. And it was just like, and if you want to find out, I was like, this is what 50 looks like. I was like, happy birthday to me, So it's like, so I really don't want to talk about that either. It's just like, let's just get to it. And, I don't know, maybe I might be doing it a little more slowly or whatever, but whatever, I'm going to do that privately. So
it's right. That's really funny. Yeah, well, I mean, okay, well, it's kind of an important topic. So not aging, but like thinking about memory, and like one context I have for like thinking about, today's conversation, the book and stuff, and we'll get to it, but it's like this idea of looking back. I mean, because your book is looking back over your career, and I'm super like, I have a lot of questions about sort of what that experience is like for you,
Sure.
But wait, let's hold that in advance actually, because as we're talking about that, let me start with the question. So there's sort of one question that like, I really like always like to ask during these interviews, and it's a question my predecessor had. So I'm going to ask it, and it goes roughly like this: like, looking back, like in your childhood, and this whole thing of like growing up queer. I mean, it's all in your work, and I want to talk about that aspect of it. But for now, let's just start with like when you first recognized yourself in a piece of art. Like what was the germination of you as a poet, like, or of a creative person at all? Like, when did you first see yourself like in that space? Like, if it was in a particular piece of art, or if it was like a particular experience you had, something like that. You get what I'm saying?
So, I would say that I first saw the possibility of poetry, which wasn't necessarily seeing the self, but I guess in some ways it was, because sort of in classic fashion, we had a collected Robert Frost, like out like on the coffee table. Like, remember when people used to do this? And so, and I remember sort of thumbing through it and probably loving all the wrong Frost, like Fire and Ice and shit like that. Nothing gold can stay and all that. And, but, you know, I read it and something in me was moved by whatever the compression, just whatever was happening on the page. And, you know, again, there's something about that that feels otherworldly, or maybe if there's like a little bit of the divine, because, you know, I grew up in a household that liked reading, but it wasn't overly literary. Like, my dad's an engineer, you know, and yet I read this and something shifted and I was drawn to it. And then, you know, that sort of like was the gateway. You know, when I really started to see myself more was when I started reading Keats, and that was fairly early. And but just, you know, just in general, sort of like the kind of flint of putting words together. I remember, and, you know, speaking of aging, I remember like when I was young, I like co-wrote this disco song with my sister, my poor sister. I like used to like write dumbass plays and like make her star in them and shit like that. And like, you know, like, but I remember we wrote this disco song called, oh God, this is bad, but like Boogie on Down That Floor. I mean, like, I remember, like, I still remember it like in my head, like, so like, I mean, it was giving you real like late 70s disco. So, you know, I mean, I was just drawn to this. Something in me has always been drawn to putting the words together. And, you know, and seeing, I think even early, like the possibility of rhyme and a kind of structure. I mean, I didn't have any words for it then, and I wasn't thinking about it then, obviously. But in retrospect, you know, I was, so Frost, it was Frost and then Keats. And then when I was in high school, I remember I read a Tom Gunn poem, and, you know, it was leather and there were some like bulges. And I was like, okay, wow, this is like really speaking my language, even if I didn't, again, have the language for it, both the queerness and the poetry. So yeah.
That's so amazing. I mean, well, okay, like I'm constellating like a number of elements of this story that you're, I mean, writing a disco song. What I love about the idea of writing a disco song too is like, it's disco. It kind of like, it almost feels like the song already exists. You just have to find it. Like, you know, I mean, there's just a continuous beat that's playing, and yeah.
Basically, life is disco, and it is your choice if you want to step into it.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that's beautifully said. Yeah, totally. See, it is. It's the stream. Like, yeah.
Right.
No, and I've loved this too. I mean, well, I mean, speaking of disco, I mean, there's been lots of you know, reissues of like vintage, you know, overlooked stuff, you know, from back in the day, and some of those disco, like I'm from Chicago originally, and like lots of like early 80s disco stuff that's kind of getting refound, and it's so good. Like, and it feels that way too. It's just this channel of water that's just been moving underground the whole time that we just never saw. Like, you know,
totally. Yeah, so yeah, there's this great there's this queer bar in the Tenderloin, one of the few left, and it's called Aunt Charlie's. And on Thursday nights, they used to, now they have it irregularly, but they would have Tube State Connection, where they would like, you couldn't have your cell phone on. You can't have your cell phone on because there were no fucking cell phones in the time of disco.
Right.
And then they put all this like vintage porn around, and they would play like these stripping videos from like 1979, and they would play like deep cut bathhouse B-side disco. Yeah. So it was like, yeah, you're just sort of like tweaked out on Fire Island in 1978 every Thursday night.
Yeah.
It is like my favorite. It is the best. I love it so much.
It's amazing. Okay, so I'm also hearing like some like maybe in my mind what I see was like conflicting sort of elements here, like and here are the conflicting elements, which is this idea of like disco and technique and technicalness, like, and even some like disco is like, it's kind of machine music in a way, right? I mean, like all dance music is. And then someone like Keats, who's like this slippery, you know, kind of wine spill, you know, sort of poet to me, romantic. And I'm curious if like, what was it about Keats, like, that you think was compelling you? Because Keats seems at odds to me with this, like.
Well, I mean, I think, you know, probably early. I mean, I remember reading Endymion just particularly early, and there was something truly, I think, special about the beauty of sort of like the romantic pitch of things. I mean, and the way that it was constructed, because I don't think that something like disco and Keats are at cross purposes. I would imagine I would have said this sentence, but that's, you know, I like having disco and Keats in the same sentence because I do think that they coexist. You know, they coexist in my mind because one has a sense of freedom reading or listening to these songs, but behind the scenes there is this craft, and yes, it's more foregrounded in somebody like Keats, and it's sort of like in the background of something like I Feel Love by Donna Summer. But they're both, because they're working, one has the sense of freedom to exist in the space that the art is creating, and thereby not think about how it was made, but rather exist fully in the made thing. So that's where they sort of overlap for me.
Incredible. Freedom within this space, like freedom in, I mean, this kind of like, I don't want to jump to the question just yet. I mean, but you're touching on things that, I think I'd before we get to some of this terrain, it'd be kind of cool to like understand, like, I mean, your work, which is, which I think you feel comfortable calling like as, queer formalism, like part of this like history of that, and I'm sort of curious just for, I mean, we've talked a lot about it, but I'm just wondering if you could maybe just kind of define what that means to you, queer formalism, or and how it relates to your work.
I mean, so I think we have this trajectory of queer writers that have been, people like Auden, et cetera, but like through time, we have, this sort of formal approach toward writing. And then there is this layer of queerness, whether it is sort of like hiding in plain sight, or it is, on the surface. I think it's a, it's a sensibility, it's a subject matter. And, I think I am in a line of these, but I think also, I think sometimes there is this, and you're not saying this, but like there's this curious sense that those things coexisting is somehow kind of remarkable. And I don't think that it is at all. I think one, there's an incredible history of queer formal writing, but two, formalism is it just means you're making choices in art, so I think defining what formalism is narrowly, I don't think works particularly well for me. I just think, I know that there's strict formalism, but ultimately for me, that just means I see kind of a panoply of choices, and then I listen to the poem, and it's asking me maybe to move in a particular direction based on subject matter, based on where I think the poem might be going. And if I'm paying attention, then, I might do something, as a consequence. But, tenor and vehicle, the same thing. It's not, there's no air, there's no space between them, because you don't get one without the other, and to think of them as kind of like parallel things, I think that does not at all work for me. I never thought of that. I just think that the poem is how it's being made, and how it's being made is the poem. And at the end, you get this thing, and hopefully, there's no tension between those things, because there shouldn't be tension, there shouldn't be air, there should just be, this was the only choice for the piece.
Fantastic. I love that that there's no air between them, nothing betwixt them. I'm hearing like old philosophy here, like and that the tenor and vehicle, the poem is the thing, and that's something, I think of, I think it's like an old Coleridge adage where it's like, what is the poem? It's the poem itself. Like, what is the meaning of the poem? It's just the poem itself. Like,
right. The isness. It's just like a Stevensian sort of like ontological thing. So, that's.
I will never hear the word ontological without hearing a slap from here on out.
I think you either have to cock your eyebrow, put a sword inside of you, or have a slap when you say ontological, because really, honestly, it's a bit silly. So
it's one of my favorite words on earth. But I like it. There's three options. I like those three options. You choose. You can pick. That's really hilarious. Well, Shoot. Okay. Would you want to read a poem? I mean, this seems like a
Sure.
good time. Like, does that sound so good? Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So I think I'll read the title poem of the collection. So this has an epigraph from Ed Smith, which is the epigraph is the entirety of the Ed Smith poem, which is called Converse All Stars, which I think is pretty great. So this is the epigraph. The sun sets. We are all robots. Market forces. Deal. Eating cereal over the sink. I think this is what's real. The urgent piss, the grout like doubt. By now, anonymous, no gent is in his lift. Adrift. This fall, all the kids want to shoot vids. Amateur auteurs, little hard godards. To boot, spittle, my haunt. I want my hair and a split somewhere between mathematics and tricks buried in the yard. The dream, a multi-level scheme. Get a shovel. I shrivel by bleak acronym, boutique gym, commie leak, Jimmy hats, metallic antibiotic, lost chats on a hill. A hell of passive investors. Reboot love with massive clawback provisions, money dripping off your robot back. The monsters, my stars.
Yeah, I love that poem so much. I mean, I've spent so much time with it, and it's so wonderful to hear you read it in this space. Like, and I'm thinking of like, I mean, one thing that I think is kind of remarkable about that I see in most of your work, if not all of it, is this like this person, the speaker, who's like just kind of caught in their own predicament of life, like, and they're caught in like, in this case, like it's quotidian, you know, you're eating cereal over the sink, and that you know, that feeling of being caught within this timeline that is, I mean, going back to ontological or like Heideggerian or Hegelian, where it's, you know, you have these sort of horizons of time, and you're looking, you know, forward and back, and one thing I really also hear, and a question I kind of have, is about these sort of temporally located colloquialisms. You know, kids want to shoot vids, you know, getting caught in a lift, these sort of reference points that identify like a time that we're in. There's a big difference like across a span of this, and I don't know if you have this or not, but so this is the galley of the selected, right?
No, I don't have it.
Yeah,
wow,
I need to send it to you. I'll send you. I need to send it to you. I always get these in a hurry. So it feels really good to have. I mean, this is just kind of the fake one, but you know, but it's in my hand here. Looking back, so there's a lot of kind of that, like being caught in a life and looking back kind of questions that I want to have. So the first one of these, if you don't mind kind of, you know, going maybe starting a little pedestrian with me here, is just like what the process of assembling a selected, like, I think we've called it like legacy volumes. I mean, one part of this question is just like sort of technical, which is just like what was the assembly, like how was curation and sequencing and that. But the other one is, which I'm, you know, more interested in, is like what your emotional experience of looking back over all these poems was.
Yeah, it was curious. I mean, in some ways, the thought of new and selected is kind of like, I mean, especially with a press like Copper Canyon, sort of like, wow, I have, you know, to quote a poem, I have climbed the mountain, there's nothing left to do. But then it's also like, dude, am I like, now do I get to die now? Like, what the fuck? You know, it's like so weird. I'm like, I am only 50. So
please don't. Right. Yeah.
But you know, so it was curious. I mean, it's incredibly exciting. And then I'm just like, well, it's like volume 1, you know, like Madonna. So there you go. So
I
yeah, it
just
was
I just
very
a quick I just checked out the Immaculate Collection from the library this weekend too, and really enjoyed going. That's her first kind of retrospective of the the song. Anyway, it was kind of the
oh,
same experience. Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
I know. Oh yes. Yes, indeed. So, it was really interesting. So then I was like, when I knew I was putting it together, I kind of, put all the volumes in front of me. And with some of the poems, it's kind of like, oh, I know that that's a keeper, and as I was going through it, but one of the things that I really wanted to do is I was not in favor of the approach of like, for my first 3 volumes, I want to have like 2 poems. And then at the last one I did, look how brilliant I am because I'm going to have 49 of them. And I was like, that always just seems a little disingenuous to me because I was pretty stoked when my first book came out. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have a broad representation, of my career up to this point and really kind of chart the story, the story of place, the story of queerness, both of a personal mythology and queer history writ large as I see it. And, in order to tell that story, I wanted to have a meaningful representation from all of the books up until this point and general parody. So I have like 14, 15, 16 from all the 5 previous volumes. So going through it was really interesting, especially the earliest book, Complaint in the Garden, because I wrote the first poem when I was like 21 as an undergraduate. It was like 1993, and just to kind of like go back and you're thinking about all these things. So most of the kind of like emotional responses were from the really early stuff because I was like, it was so long ago, But one of the things that really brought out was, sometimes it's just so easy to forget with the kind of like the grind of the biz or just, kind of pushing forward. And that is, there was so much magic when I came to poetry. There was so much magic. All I wanted to do was write poetry. Like I changed my major and like forgot to do other things except like go out and be like really self-destructive in the 90s. But then it was just like, I just listened, and I just wrote poetry and it was so exciting. It was like the only thing. And, it really reminded me of that. Not that really I've forgotten that because poetry, every poem I write is still like so exciting. And it's also one of the reasons why I love form because it's a puzzle and I'm always enjoying myself. And like the minute I'm not, then why do this? It's not exactly lucrative. Like my fame is like, I don't know what letter, but D list probably doesn't do it justice. So, I'm having like a great time still, but looking at those early poems, I was like, oh, just remember when it was just so magic, And so it's just a wonderful reminder because I love being a writer. I love writing poems. And, like I'm appropriately self-aware to be like, oh God, calling myself a poet is like so cringe, but it's also like so amazing, and I think that to be in that space is, I think, really important. But, it's just still so fun. It's still so exciting to write. It's still so cool to sit down and not know where I'm going and have the poem tell me, I learn by going where I need to go. It's just sort of like exactly that. And so that was such a wonderful thing, really, to be reminded of that and the true mystery and magic of what it is that I'm able to do. So that was super cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that magic. Like, and I'm so encouraged to hear you say that that maybe it's just sort of changed, or that you still are so excited by the poems, and and one would hope. I sort of feel. I hear that a little bit. Maybe I'm attaching my own personal feeling about this, but like that sense too that like you can sustain your work if the poems matter to you most, like, or if you can get around the grind of the biz, like, and that need, that professional, obviously we all kind of complain about this, the professional need to publish and that kind of stuff, which of course you've escaped by not being an academic, and that's something we could talk about too. But like, looking back at the time, I mean, when I'm also sort of hearing your answer, and this is sort of a question I have, you mentioned a personal mythology, but then there's also, of course, like a public mythology and about like the queer movement. And a lot of the poems look back over what it was like to be younger, to be uncertain about even your own sexuality. Of course, not having a community, of course, feeling that you had to be invisible, like in the closet. And yet there's this tinge of what I will call nostalgia for that time. And maybe part of it's that self-discovery, like in that. And so one kind of question I had, like, is your sense of looking back with like both nostalgia, but also this like acknowledgement that like it was a lot harder, you know, like, and it was a lot harder as a younger poet. I mean, that all that magic, but like you were younger, you were uncertain, like, you know, maybe you feel more confident now, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't call it nostalgia. I would call it grace, you know, because I look at something like Florida again, where I, you know, sort of like look at my younger self and like try to kind of be a little tender with the self and even tender with that time. Like in a poem like Leo and Lance, where I'm like looking back and like remember like when I was buying porn and, you know, it was kind of ridiculous. But then just for me, I mean, I'm not nostalgic for it, but it's important for me to write about it and to write about it with some openness and some humor, I think, in some sense, but also, you know, to try and speak to the time, you know, that it wasn't always easy. So I think that for me, I think nostalgia would maybe sort of say that I thought it was better than it was, or I wanted it to somehow be present, and I don't, but I want to be able to write about the time in a complicated way and in a way that shows, I think, ultimately that it was difficult, but that there is a, you know, there's a sense of trying, just sort of like surviving it, and there's a sense of tenderness that I feel toward all of us, you know, queer kids just in general. But like, you know, if I think about my own particular story, sort of, you know, queer in the 80s with not a lot of, you know, like a loving family, but like not a lot of information, and then isolation, and the default was homophobia, and then, you know, HIV AIDS, and like just the whole thing was, you know, it's like, it's a mild form of, you know, when I use it really carefully, but it is a mild form of trauma that for us to sort of like live through that. And then, you know, it's like I carry that in my body, you know, I know I do. And so, you know, again, you know, my friends who are 10 years older lost everyone, you know, but it's but I think it's important for me to write about it in a complicated way, and that does include openness. It's not just sort of like it was all stark, because it wasn't all stark. It was a complicated story, but I think it's a story worth telling because, you know, again, I think in some ways people don't know the story. You know, I have a poem called Friday where I talk about, you know, the story being marooned on my shelves like Paul Manette. You know, and sort of like, I think it's sort of like, well, you know, we had that, it happened, and then suddenly things shifted, and then it's just kind of like ancient history. When it's not, it's like so current. I mean, that's the funny thing about history, right? You know, our past lies before us, you know, so it's, you know, in a classic, in an ancient way. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's something that I think about. You know, I'm trying to do it, you know, rigorously in a complicated fashion, in a fashion that hopefully is not easy, but I'm trying to do it with some tenderness and some compassion. So
yeah, no, and of course I think you do, and also with complexity, like you're saying, like, I mean, and I think, and this is maybe part of the formalism and what form can do, and or formalism can do, like, which is allow for these complex and somewhat ambiguous tonalities, you know, that happen. And I think that's, I mean, I feel that in reading of some of the past. I feel that in reading some of your, you know, other poems about science and medical testing and things, you know, like, And on that point, actually, so this, okay, so Toby, my colleagues Toby and Casey kind of together, it came up with a couple questions. They have a really great one on form, and this touches on a little bit of conversations that we've had in the past.
Mhm.
But so I'm just going to read this verbatim, this question to you. So let me
Sure.
pull it over if you're ready for this one here.
Mhm.
So okay, so Randall, so writing in form feels like this high-risk engagement on the page, but I also wonder if writing in form provides any insulation or refuge that makes it possible to address the real dangers of a world that is hostile to queer communities. Does the form, do you think, create like a safe space to engage that history? And yeah.
I mean, I think it absolutely does, and I think that's really well phrased because there are a few poems that I've written that have been difficult to write because of charged subject matter. Something like there's a pantoum called September Elegies, which is about queer kids who committed suicide, and like I remember writing that poem, and like just the act of writing it, like even thinking about it makes me emotional, so. And when subject matter is really charged, that to me, an entry point to that is sometimes, well, how do I make sure that I rein it in? Because I don't want it to be a selfish act. It is very fraught. Elegy can be very fraught. Writing about other people's pain can be very fraught. It has to be approached incredibly thoughtfully, because otherwise it's an essay in narcissism. And you see this go wrong and it's not good. So I wanted to say in that poem, September Elegies, I approached it very carefully, and I was like, how do I make sure that I'm keeping away the self, in some ways, because this is so not about me, but all I have is a voice. And so I felt like this is all I can do, is just, this is it. This is my currency. I can write about it, write my way through it, maybe, and then after the fact, perhaps someone will read it. I mean, I don't ever think about that when I write. I never think about audience, but something that I know will happen is that it will have readers. So with that poem in particular, because it's maybe the most charged of all my poems, perhaps, then I thought, well, the pantoum works particularly well because the turning on itself is very much like the turning on itself of suicide. And then also the repetition, you can't get away from what's happening. And I wanted it to be unforgiving. I didn't want you to be able to move away from the terrible truth of the poem. And so the pantoum, like, it is relentless. And also 27 of 28 lines are end stopped. I wanted to hold you, keep you and make it so hard. And so those choices pulled the poem in for me. And so yes, it provides permission, it provides a safe space, it pushes away, I think, any impulses for this writer to editorialize or to be selfish or to turn it back on me, the writer. I mean, and also something like the pantoum, when I say it turns on itself, like, I am very much in Ars Poetica territory. Like, I know this is a poem, I know this is a form that is doing this. However, I still have something to say about it. So there's a lot that I was thinking about when I was putting this on the page, and hopefully that can all be pushed away and just have it be this unforgiving and relentless piece, which is, I think, appropriate for the subject matter. So does that make sense?
Yeah, and I mean, I think you're also bringing in this twins, somewhat polar element, but very much that's very much in symmetry with that, which is, it's not just a safe space, but also, I mean, I'm going to use the kind of safe space, brave space language here, but like, it's a safe space and it's also a brave space. It is a place of intentional encounter that you cannot look away, and the poem is making, it's making you not do that, but it's doing it in with a moral dimension to it that is also like, asking the reader to not look away too, and I don't know, that's just a really wonderful dynamic as I hear you describing that, that unrelentingness, that holding you, that the inevitability of the poem, particularly the pantoum as it turns, that's nonetheless doesn't but it's not fatalist either, you know. I don't know. It's great. I just
No.
really feel like it's a really, everything you're describing is just walking this really fascinating, interesting line. But yeah.
I mean, I feel incredibly held by my formal choices because they enable me to move into the poem. I mean, so, you know, it's the constraints feel very freeing, you know, sort of paradoxically, but also kind of not too, because I feel like if I'm making the right choice for the poem, then again, there's no distancing there. There might not even be any tension. It's just, seems like like if I want to turn and tell a story and things unfold, but they turn back on themselves, then perhaps a sestina would be a good choice. You know, it's kind of just about, is this the best way and the only way to tell this particular story in this particular poem? And so I feel like I have the openness and the safety to say what it is that I need to say. I mean, I do think that sometimes more rigorous formal choices can push away kind of like open field impulses. I don't like an open field. It makes me nuts. You know, I'm from San Francisco. I like hills. I don't like an open field. So I don't know where I am. But if you're pushing up against me, like I feel safe and I know where I am, and I can figure out how to push the walls and like figure out where I am. So in general, I like to know where I am, and I like to feel that kind of like compression. It really makes me feel like I know where I am and where it is that I might go. So that's why free verse is fraught for me, which is why I rhyme like an addict in my somewhat free verse, because that of course is my formal element, kind of the chief formal element in my newer work, I guess, in particular, but in general too. So
yeah. I love that compression thing. I mean, I often talk with people about how like I feel weirdly calmed when I'm in crowded subways and crowded subway cars and stuff too. There's just something about that being in.
Totally. So nice. Yes.
But I mean,
yes.
Yeah, it's also the tactile, but you know, hearing you, okay, so hearing you, okay, this whole time we've been sort of talking about this idea of like entering space, entering a poem. I can't get the image of the dance club that you described out of my head, where you of disco and the porn, like, you know, like sweeping around you like on these screens. And so like part of this too, which is like, this is a question I wasn't able to like fully write, so I'm going to try and come up with this question right now, if you bear with me. And this might be the last one I'll be able to ask with our time here. But so one element of this forum too, and one element of this looking back, and of course one element of queer history and everything that I kind of feel like we're dancing around, and we're talking about, as you're saying, and which you say with care of trauma and pain. But the other element of all of this also is pleasure and desire. And when I think of dancing on the floor, and obviously with porn happening all around you, you're just in this wonderful space of pleasure like the whole way around. And I'm wondering, like, if you feel that in your own writing, in this looking back, in the poems, like what is the purpose of pleasure like in the poetry? And I also say this like with a temporal element, which is like, what is your desire then, like kind of as you look in the future? You know, we live in whacked out times. Like you live in a place in San Francisco, which has just undergone tremendous change like over the last, you know, many decades, and with the queer community there, like, I mean, can it still survive there and all these things? And so I'm kind of curious, like what you want, like, what do you want in the next like few years, like, for your work or for just the world? How's that? Is that too big? Probably too big of a question.
You just ended the question as what do I want for the world? So no, that's not too big at all. Pleasure is essential. I mean, I think if it doesn't give pleasure, then it's not a poem. I mean, I think, and that can be defined in many ways. I mean, if there isn't, and ultimately it's just, it lives in what the language itself is doing, you know, idiomatically, in terms of root, in terms of what it is that's being suggested, the associations, the inferences, what is happening with the language, and how is that creating the line, and how is that creating the stanza, and then how is that creating the poem? I think it exists in the slippages and the mysteries of the language. Language is smarter than all of us, and so it has to be approached carefully. We have language as a palimpsest, language is an allusion. Like you can't exist in a poem, you know, in a vacuum. And so I think about all of that, which is why I love idiomatic expressions so much. That's why I like rehabilitating them, which is why I like to take dead metaphors and beat the life back into them. You know, I think about all of these things. And to me, there is great pleasure in the celebration of the language that is being used. And I mean, you can argue that sort of like some of these forms, they can seem sort of so whimsical in a way, you know, even, you know, and I think there is great pleasure in, say, writing an elegy in trimeter. So that is, you know, you have the lightness of trimeter, and yet you're beating it down a little bit with elegy. So like the confusion that you can create, you know, like you can upend a reader's expectations by making moves like that, you know. I think ultimately I write to please myself. That is full stop. And like I said, I've never once, not once in my life, thought about audience. I think about clarity. I think about, am I using the right word? Am I using the right punctuation? Is this the best way to do the poem? Is this the only way to do the poem? And then it's like, go little poem. So ultimately the pleasure is my pleasure. Do I write to please myself? Because if I'm not excited, then how the fuck is a reader going to be excited? I mean, I think that's the mistake poets make. It's like, you know, I can't write to a constituency. It's like the death of the poem. So, you know, so I'm just going to write to please myself. You like it? You like it. You don't? Okay. So, so yes, absolutely. The glittering pleasure of a poem is in the language itself, you know, and the rest just takes care of itself, you know? So, and also there's a pleasure in writing the thing that, you know, it felt like I needed to write, you know, understanding that too. I mean, I think, you know, you can always tell cynicism in poems, you know, people, you know, again, poems are smarter than we are too, just as languages too. So, you know, you can always tell if something is ground out. You can tell if it's just all constituency. I'm not interested in any of that. I don't believe a word of it. So I listen to the self, I let it guide. You know, I sort of like, I'm very careful, the muse. I'm like, okay, you just show me what you need to show me and whatever. So, you know, it's all a mystery. It's all magic. It's rigor and magic. And then I just, you know, but you're absolutely right. If there's no pleasure, there's no point. Just in life.
Exactly. I'm just gonna translate that to my question about what you want for the world too. Just pleasure for the world. I just, you know.
There you go. I can't help you with the world, but my little poem, maybe, I don't know.
No, that's wonderful. It's wonderful to hear that, and I feel that too. I mean, I think that's getting back to a little bit we're talking about. It's like writing for yourself, writing because you want to be present to that your own experience, and then trusting that as, I mean, and knowing as a reader that you experience that pleasure also, like, or you know, or you know, presumably, rigor and magic. I mean, I want to talk about fitness. I really want to talk about working out too, but like, but we'll have. I don't think we have time for that.
Okay.
Let's leave it at that. I want to take this moment to think about that poem, and we're getting to the top of the hour. If you got another poem, maybe like, should we hear another one?
I do.
And let's close with that. That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay. So this is an older one. This is from my third book, Straight Razor. The Lion's Mouth. I walk into a stanza. There's decent gin here. The men are critically tanned in winter. The gin kicks in. Our eyes get all misty from an indrawn loss. Eyes bright and dead as stars on someone's walk of fame. I walk in. I walk. I raise my highball to no one. Which is to say, to you. My bow tie misses your bow tie. My chords miss yours. Who says that love isn't sartorial? Every pull of an argyle, every loop reminds me a little bit of you. This is embarrassing. This is also true. Night comes, its one-sidedness. I think I'll call in sick. I think I'll go to, I don't know, to Venice to feel something. It's good for that. I go to Venice. No, not that one. I go all the way to Venice. I get the Ezra Pound haircut, have a leering coffee break. Mostly I go for the goodbye, the first cheerless stretch on the Eurostar, because leaving it, I tell myself, is more freighted than leaving you. Just look, I left you 6 years ago and still can't believe. Goodbye, Venice. Goodbye, dogfight and glut. I left you. I left so many anonymous denunciations in the lion's mouth.
Yeah, I that poem too. I feel like I know so well, and it's so wonderful to hear.
Thank you.
I mean, safe, brave, whatever. I just feel good in the space of that poem, like, and that's, I don't know, that's wonderful. So, thank you so much, Randall. I mean, that was a beautiful reading. Thank you for this great conversation. I'm so happy we got to do it.
Me too.
Finally,
yeah,
like,
no, that was fantastic. That was so fun.
Yeah, no, I had a really great time, and let's have more. I mean, we got more to talk about. We got to save the world. We got to talk about our fitness regimes. I mean, the whole thing. Yeah,
disco, fitness. You know, co-write our Keats and disco essay. I mean, like, there's a lot. There's a lot that needs to happen.
Oh man, yeah, absolutely. Please put my name on that. I will co-author that. That sounds so good. Well, I'm super grateful for you. I'm super grateful for the poems. I'm grateful for all you out there for you know, tuning in, paying attention to Line Break. We're closing in. We're almost to the end of the season here. So so thank you all for joining us, and we'll see you next time.